Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Philip Apollo. We're going to talk a little bit about why and how he started his research, and he's got some interesting finds like I have. So, welcome, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Hi, how are you, Bob?
I'm great. I'm great. So, where are you located?
I am located in Plainfield, Illinois. We're about 55 minutes south of Chicago. We're actually more southwest. Uh, for the viewers out there in Illinois, we're around the town Naperville, just south of Naperville.
I want to ask you initially, what you got. You're obviously probably a couple of years younger than I am. What got you started with tracing your family?
Well, what really got me started tracing my family was when my college roommate at law school started to do his family tree, and he started to come up with some very interesting uh, finds. And I knew since a small child that my grandmother's family and my grandfather's family on my father's side of the family descended from nobility. They were of like family of noble origins, not necessarily title holders. So I was like, oh well, I want to know necessarily who exactly I'm related to and how I'm related to them in history, because I am a huge history nerd. So I had to begin my research, and that started about 4 years ago.
Yeah, and that's not dissimilar to me. First of all, I'm a huge history nerd myself, and I think that's kind of a lot of people do the genealogy. That you like history, you want to find out where you come from, I guess. Uh,
Yes.
and as you know, my paternal grandmother comes from nobility. Again, not a title holder, and obviously she was a woman, so she wasn't entitled to anything anyway.
Yes.
Um, but I got started because I have my great grandfather's, I like to refer to it as a calling card. It's about the size of an index card, and it has his name on it. And it says from the Dukes of Capricoda. And my mother used to tell me that my father's family came from, some sort of nobility. So other than word of mouth, did you have anything physical from the family that you were able to get started with?
I personally didn't have anything physical here in the States. My grandmother always told me that her father had this big gold ring, and it had this lion with a bar across and three stars, which is actually our family's crest. And she told me that her oldest brother got it, or yeah, her oldest brother received the big signet ring. So that was something always just discussed, amongst, she would always talk about it with us kids, me particularly. She used to talk about it a lot. She used to, always say like, oh, my family came from very sophisticated people. So that was always something that was word of mouth. And I guess that she's seen in her lifetime, but I never actually got to physically see the ring because I've never traveled out to Italy. And so from there, I always, it sparked an interest in me really to research and knowing some of my once I began to know some of my family out in Italy, it really started putting the pieces together because in the town of Zagadis, my family is the mayor. I'm related to the mayor and every other person in important positions in the town, pretty much, whether it's the lawyers in the town, the doctors, or the statesmen. So that was pretty cool. When I started to pry into that, but I didn't necessarily have like a calling card like you. They weren't from a substantially like wealthy noble family. Their family was not that well off in terms of like when people think of nobility. They just owned a lot of land, and they had a pretty nice farmhouse in Zagadis. It's today. When I see pictures of it, I wasn't able to retrieve any of the pictures off the Zagadis page, but I recall seeing a couple pictures of them, and it was a pretty nice house. It was beautiful. The view that they had from all the land and stuff.
Yeah. So where is Zagaris? I'm not familiar with where that is.
Zagadis is about 15-minute walk east of the main city of Catanzaro in Calabria.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I kind of thought it was around there because I just recently found out um, that I descend from the Rufo family, one of the many families I descend from, and my 23rd great grandfather, or something like that, was the first Count of Cantizaro.
Yes. I actually am related to them as well through my grandmother's side of the family, Caravita, because their family ended up moving to just Calabria in general when they intermarried with the Cersale family, and the Cersale family were at one point the barons of Zagaris, Scylla, and Cersale.
Oh, great. That's really neat. Yes, and I know you sent me the link to the Caravita family tree. So, and I noticed in there we do have some common names like Caracciolo and Aquila de Aragona. And I'm sure we go back much further than that, as we go through the tree going all the way back. What in that Caravita family, where do you first link up in there?
Tommaso Caravita he lived in 1610 to 1675. He married noble Luisa Cersale, and they had numerous children, and their last born male, Mikel, was a lawyer in Scylla, and he owned land. And then he married a woman, Francesca Correa. I think that's how you say the last name. I'm not sure exactly. My Italian's terrible. The Correas, a male, Correa ended up intermarrying with a descendant of one of his kids. And then they ended up marrying in with the later barons of Scylla, the Peroni family.
Right. And yeah, and you see a lot of that as you go through these records.
Yeah.
That was one of my great finds when I found the Libro di Oro, and was able to start tracing the families back. Again, when I started, I started with my grandmother's grandfather, who I mentioned, Nicola Piramalo. I had no idea that, in fact, I didn't even know who he married, this Amelia Carciolo. And when I found him, I found her first, and I found that family being more prominent. And I had no idea the name. And I called my cousin who lived with my grandmother, and asked her if she knew the name Carciolo. And she said, well, yeah, that was Nanny's mother. And all the names matched up, with the typical, Italian naming conventions.
Yeah.
Her mother was Amelia, and that was my aunt, my godmother's name, Amelia. My father was Nicholas. He was the second son, so that all worked out. But when I talked to her, she told me, she used to talk about her family a little bit, and said that her cousin was the princess. And nobody had any idea how this connection worked or how far back it went. And they just thought she was, a batty old lady or whatever. But it turned out that her grandfather was the prince. And to your point, they weren't the nobility that was royal. Most of it came from owning towns and having money and that kind of stuff. But I don't know if you found the same thing, but as I found records, a lot of the records either show that they were property owners, and in some of the records, it actually said for occupation, rich person.
My family, they some of them had occupation rich person, but they always had a profession. Like a lot of my family were doctors or lawyers or surgeons or cavaliere, knights.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm terrible with Italian.
No, so am I.
I shouldn't even try to speak it, but they were then listed as knights. They did own property, a lot of them. When I look back at the records, even when I sent you that one link of the archives, everyone that's listed on there that owns property in the town is pretty much related to me. I think there was like two families that weren't related to me, and they're not even like from the Catanzaro area. They just own land in Zagaris, and they're from like way like distant part of Calabria, like whether it was from like the southern like tip of Reggio or from like the most northern point of Cosenza. So yeah, that's pretty much what I found a lot of. But because my family didn't have titles, they had to have professions, and so that's where they had their substantial earnings from was being professionals. But I do know that I think that's like my ninth great grandfather was the Baron of San Nicola Leopinarde in Zagaris. It's a rustic feud. And he was listed as a rich man, and he didn't have a profession. So that's similar to like how your family was, but that's going back to like the 1620s.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the way it worked was obviously only one person was titled.
Yeah.
At the further back you go, you see some of the things were split up between maybe, two or three sons or something like that.
Yeah, those were the more powerful families.
Yeah, yeah. Which my grandmother's mother was from one of those very, very powerful families.
Yes.
Although there were a million kids, so there were kids all over the place. They had lots of kids. But one thing that I found, and I didn't know when I was there like 25 years ago, my grandmother or her mother's family, they practically owned like a whole street on Via Carbonara in Naples. And, as I was going through it, what I found was in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, most of the nobility were domiciled in Naples, and they would go visit the lands once or twice a year and, collect whatever they were going to collect, but they all lived in Naples, even though they may have had places in those lands.
Yes, because they wanted to live in the royal court amongst the king himself and the queen himself, and be a part of that whole hierarchical society. That's where they would have local nobility or collect the taxes, and that's who they would deal with, or they would deal with the lower class themselves. I know that my family, Scapani, they were actually the barons of San Nicola Leopinarde, back in the 1600s. From records in the 1580s, when the Spanish king of Naples came into Zagaris, and he collected taxes from one of my ancestors, Annibal Scapani. And then that was in like 1581.
Yeah, well, and that's what happened, and you see the names as you go through, right? You see the Italian nobility marrying the Spanish nobility, and I have a lot of Aragona, and I've been able to trace back to Spain and France and Germany. So how far back have you been able to get with that, whether it's Spanish roots or French roots, through these noble families?
Well, I was able to get back to my grandmother's male line through the Libro Diuna to 1425, and from there I was able to find information on the Caravita family in Spain, but their name was Garabito. So like your family, they had to change their name when they came to Italy, just like the Borgia family had to change their name as well. It was Borja or something like that in Spanish. So back in Spain, they came from the Kingdom of Leon, and they actually traveled with the Trasmaria dynasty when they took power in Aragon. So they were administrators to the Kingdom of Leon, and they were some some just low-level lords in Villanueva, Asturias, Spain, and they came to Aragon. And then from Aragon, they moved to Naples. And then obviously, through being related to the Spanish king of Sicily, I'm able to trace my roots back to Charlemagne, as well as Byzantine Emperor Alexis Komnenos, through James the First, conqueror of Aragon.
So once you get that connection, it takes a lot of work to get there.
Yes.
And, when I talk to people, I'm sure you do the same thing. People say, oh, there's millions of people are related to them. And I tell them, yes, that's true. There are millions of people, that come from them. But
to find the connection, though.
Exactly.
And that's where I told people, man, like, hey, I was able to find the connection. And I was able to actually find it on my grandfather and grandmother's side because my grandparents themselves are actually fourth cousins. So they were intermarrying with each other because they had to consolidate wealth and stuff like that inside of that small town because, I'm not sure if you're very familiar with the feudal system, but the feudal system, you had the baron of a town, and inside that town, you'd have a bunch of plot of lands, and that's where their knights would make up these plots of land. So those families would often have to really intermarry with each other, third and fourth cousins, fifth cousins wise, to consolidate the wealth and be able to own all their land still, or else it would revert back to the barons. And if the barons weren't able to then have people fill up the land and give that and revert it back to the counts and then the dukes and then to the king.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co. Yeah, no, exactly, and obviously, you see the same names pop up, when you go through these things, and I was totally floored as I'm sure you were when you started finding these connections, and just looking at the history of some of these people, and sometimes we'll be watching the television. You mentioned the Borgias. We were watching the Borgias, and when they mentioned Alessandro Farnese, the Pope Paul III, I said to my wife, I said, "That's my grandfather." She was like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, he's Pope Paul III is my grandfather." And I always say, I said, I don't know when I pass if I run into Paul III if I'm in the right place.
I mean, from the show, they depict him as a pretty good guy. He seems to be the higher moral character in the show compared to, Cesare Borgia and Juan Borgia, who they depict as rather foul individuals. But, I'm not too sure how they were as people because, we weren't living then, so we could only go on.
Well, yeah, and they weren't supposed to have kids.
Yes. Yes.
So I mean, luckily he did. So, I found tons and tons of interesting people, but through your research, who have you found that you directly descend from or one or two people that you would say, wow, that's amazing?
Well, from the small town of Zagadis, I sent you the link of that's my fourth grade uncle. So that was pretty cool to see that I was descended from a nobleman from Zagadis who was able to be popular enough to have a Wikipedia page made from Paolo Emilio Tulli, or in some of the records it's Tullio, because I see that often with the surnames in my family where some records are listed with an I, some records are listed with a no, and it gets me a little confused, but I guess it's Tulli with an I because in the modern day the family spells it with an I. Yeah, but I was very wow, taken back by that. I thought that was very cool because, that's from the town my father was born in. Connection I really thought was very cool was, I discussed it earlier, was James the first of Aragon, he was a Crusader king. I mean, he conquered Valencia, the Balearic Islands, Sicily. So I thought that was just awesome. I was just like, wow, when I found that out, I was like, wow, that's my 26th great grandfather. I was very proud of that fact for a very long time. Actually, I didn't even go back and trace anything beyond him for a very long time because I was just like, wow. Because I remember playing the game Crusader Kings 2 before I began my genealogical research and using him, and he was just awesome in the game. So when I found out I was related to him, I was just like, oh man, that's so cool.
That's funny, and it's funny that you related to him in the game before you even knew. Maybe he was directing you from afar. Who knows? One of the ones that I just find, and I joke with my wife all the time, is Ferrante of Naples, because he had he believed in keeping his enemies close.
Yes. Yes, his Last Supper table.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. When I read about that in history, I was like, wow, that's awesome.
He was one crazy dude, and and I don't know if you've used it yet, because I'm as I'm going through it and trying to put together this book on people, the Turnkey Italia. They have a lot of information on a lot of people that you don't find on like Wikipedia or some of the more notable encyclopedias. And I found out some amazing things about some of my family, 12, 13, 14, up to 20th great grandfathers and grandmothers that I was not able to find anyplace else. And all you have to do is type in the name. And if there's a connection, they'll give you information. So if you haven't used that yet, you should look into it because it's really, really pretty neat.
Can you send me a link for that?
Yeah, I will definitely.
Awesome. I have not used that yet. And I have family obviously from Sicily. The Tully family originates in Messina, but they're not of Spanish origins. They probably intermarried with Spaniards, but obviously the Moncada family, or Moncada. I'm not, because I've seen spelling two different ways where it's spelled Moncada and then Moncada. That noble family from Sicily, my family's interrelated with, and I would love to find out more information about those individuals that we don't find on Wikipedia or any other sources, because they owned a considerable amount of land, and I believe a couple of them were war generals and stuff like that during like the Ottoman invasions and things like that of that nature.
Oh, that's really cool. So now, so your dad was born in Italy?
Yes. My dad was actually born in Zagreus.
Oh, wow. So, and when did he come, and why did he come?
My dad came in 1957, and his family came because there just wasn't that much work available. My male line, the Apollos, they were never, we don't know too much about them actually, because they were adopted. So like they didn't have the status that the families they intermarried with had. So they didn't have, like the lockdown professions of being like, the town pediatrician or the pharmacologist or the lawyer. So my grandfather, had to, go and, after the war, and after he was a prisoner of war for a long time after World War II, he came back in 1949 or 1950, I believe, end of 49, early 1950. He just didn't have the opportunities that other family members had to him. So he felt that he needed to pick up and leave and move to America. And my grandmother had a bunch of, not a bunch, but 3 older brothers. So they, were getting her family's stuff, not her. So, when they got married, they picked up and they left and they went to America.
Yeah. So my dad, passed many, many years ago. So he had no clue. I have no idea what he knew. I don't really know how much my grandmother knew beyond her, grandparents or maybe great grandparents. I did find out that my, there's a painting of him where I don't look exactly, but there's definitely a resemblance. You could look at the picture and see the resemblance.
I've seen you post a picture of you at, I think it's 30, which is around the same age I am right now, and you post a picture of the your ancestor car. I don't even want to butcher it.
Prince Marino.
Prince Marino, and you guys look. I could see the resemblance.
And yeah, it is pretty striking. And I just found out, I mean, I knew he was, the Duke of here and a Count of there and a Baron from the other place. But again, on this Dracani, I found out that he owned almost all of present day Campania.
Oh, wow.
That's how powerful this guy was.
Wow, that's really powerful. Jeez.
And he was, I think there were 6 or 7 of his ancestors and descendants that were Knights of the Spanish Golden Fleece and Grandees of Spain, and all these other kinds of things. And so, so my father had already passed when I started doing this research. My mom was still alive, and I found her family back in Torito, back to like the mid 1700s or something like that. But when I started telling about my father's family, she was like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" So what did your family think when you found out all of this information?
My siblings, my older brothers, they were a little bit skeptical of it because we're like middle class in America, we're not anything anything special. So like my siblings were a little bit doubting of it. My dad was kind of like, well, I remember my mother's parents having, wealth, and they were very like nice people, and they would donate all the time to the less fortunate and stuff like that. So when I told my dad, he was kind of like, I don't know. Particularly when I talked about my grandfather's side of the family, his mother, my grandfather's mother's side of the family, he was just like, oh, like he was a little skeptical on that. But when it came to my father's mother's side of the family, he was a little bit more like, that makes a little bit of sense. And when I told my grandmother, she said her father used to tell her all the time that the family came from very noble people, and that they had to be polite to everyone and stuff like that, because that's the noble way. So she wasn't too shocked when I came back and gave her this big family tree. I guess one of her nephews did the tree and did just straight down the male line of Caravita. And that's where I then matched up my tree and was like, okay, I did it right with him. But he didn't do the whole snake connection going to, the Cercel, and the Cercel were intermarried with the Siscara family, and they were intermarried with the Ventimiglia family, who's related to the De Aragona family. And, that De Aragona family is related to the Anjouns, who are a candidate branch of the Capian dynasty, so they didn't do all that research. I ended up doing that research myself because I love history. So when I found that out, I went down, wormholes on wormhole upon wormholes. But yeah, she was very, like receptible to it. About my grandfather's family though, they weren't as the family wasn't as like, oh really, because they just that family was never, the Opipiti were just, I guess, like minor nobles, you would say, like just small town barons, and they were doctors of pharmacology. So that was really their profession. I traced that family all the way back to the 1500s. Not necessarily like straight down my line. I just kept finding records. I was able to trace straight down the line to the early 1700s. But then I was able to find records on different, like, I don't know if they're necessarily like related directly or if it's like an uncle or something like that, but going all the way back to the 1500s of the family practicing pharmacology in that town. So I think it was 1560 was the farthest I was able to go back on that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do the same thing. My dad's family, Sorrentino, I couldn't find anything, and I eventually finally hired somebody over in Italy to get me a jump start, and he found a whole bunch of records. And I knew that my father's father, that his name had to be Achille, because that was my uncle's name, and I couldn't find anything. So they came up with their records, and I found out that the family, as far back as I could get, about the same time, 1750 or something like that, they came from Nocere Superiore, not too far from Naples. And that I think it was third great grandfather, uh, like you, was a pharmacist.
Oh, wow.
And I can't get back any further than him right now, but my great grandfather, he eventually became a lawyer. And I think, you try to piece these things together. He married a woman whose parents or father was a lawyer. So I'm guessing that somehow he got trained to be a lawyer by the father-in-law or something like that. And he eventually became a Supreme Court justice in Naples.
Oh, that's really cool.
And I learned this, believe it or not, I learned this from a New Jersey newspaper from the 1920s.
That's wild. That's
Yeah.
wild that you learned it from a New Jersey newspaper in the 1920s.
Yeah, and what happened was my dad was born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Three of his older siblings were born in Italy, and him and his the youngest sister were born here. And he was born in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And there was one of these, free days on newspaper.com or something like that. And I just started, searching, Scotch Plains, New Jersey newspapers. And there's a local paper here. And I probably found about 40 articles from the family back then, and two obituaries. And one was the death of my grandfather's mother. And it stated that, I guess it was an honorary title because they had them listed as the Marquis or Marchesa. And the women don't change their names, right? So it was Marchesa
Yes.
Julia Princi. And it said that he was the Supreme Court justice in Naples.
That's very neat.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to find.
No, you never know. That's right. That's right. I tell people, just you start off by, going to civil. First, you start off by making, a quick family tree. Your grandparents, and then you ask your grandparents, do you remember your parents and your grandparents? Mm-hmm. And from there, then you go to the town that they're from, and you go to the civil records, and then from the civil records, you go then to once you find people, then you try to go back to then see if it can go trace it back further to, say, the church records. Especially in like Italy or Spain or other Spanish colonized countries, because Southern Italy was really colonized by the Spanish. That's why things are so similar. If you look at the way that Spain has their records and Mexico has their records, it's all very similar. Yeah.
And it's like you said, you start going down these wormholes and finding things like that. And again, I have no idea what my dad knew about his family, and whether he knew his grandfather was this guy, because he would have been very young when he passed away. But I do the same thing when people ask me about. I say, ask grandma. She may not know everything, but she'll certainly get you started in the right direction.
Yes, exactly, and that's everything. Because some people they don't even know where to begin. And that's really hard to do research when you don't even know where to begin. So that's why, especially the generation born in like the early 1920s, they really. Well, not just them, people older than that too, or people that came a little bit later that still hold their roots strong. They really know where their family comes from. That's why you're able to get the specific town, and then from there you could really get some good research, because that's finding the right information's everything too. I've done things where I've gone down like the wrong line of my family, because it's like so many people have like so many similar names too. I don't know if you had that problem at all.
Not as much.
Like, I was just like, dang, like this guy's name's Giuseppe and his name's Giuseppe, and they're born like 2 years apart. And it's like, well, now I got to figure out like who's their dad and how, you know what I mean? Like, cause they all were like naming each other like the same thing, and they're living in like the same area, whether it's this town, Zagaris, or it's Silla, or it's, Taberna. it's just, I'm just like looking at these things and I'm like, wow, ooh. Like a couple of times I made mistakes and I had to go back and edit it. But I mean, the mistakes aren't, big where it's like, this guy's like a freaking, Duke, and then this guy's, like a nobody. It's not like a big mistake like that. It's like, oh, this is, his brother. Like you went down like brother, like instead of like him, it's like his second cousin.
We'll be right back.
Lafayette, we are here. The French history podcast for the American public by a Frenchman. Learn all about France's fascinating history, its great characters like Charlemagne, Joan of Arc, Louis XIV, or Napoleon, but also the great events that marked France, Europe, and sometimes the whole world. Lafayette, we're here. Available wherever you get your podcast or on LafayettePodcast.com. À bientôt.
Right. Well, I had my mom's family. I had my mother's uncle. There were 5 Dominics. So 4 passed away when they were babies. And, you would have thought that, after 2 or 3, they would have said, maybe this isn't a good name. But
yeah, maybe the name's bad omen.
Yeah, you would think so. But there were 5 before they got to one Dominic that survived. And he wound up living, I guess, into his late 70s, early 80s or something like that. But I found that was making me nuts, believe me, because I was like, well, wait a second. How many Dominics did these people have? And it was 5. And in between, they had like a girl.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were 5 in one family.
That's wild.
I know.
Yeah.
And now, conversely, and you may have seen some of this on my grandmother's mother's family. They have, some of them have like 12 names strung together. I don't know if you've come across that, but when you find the record, because they were nobility, and they just string out everybody and his brother.
Yeah, like mine have like 3 first names. My grandma Mangone, they were Knights of Elby, which is like the town like right next to Zagadis. They have like 3 first names. It's like Giuseppe Domenico Antonio Mangone, and it's just like, whoa. And then like my grandma's family obviously has that too when you go back into like the 1800s, and it's like, which one is the first name?
Yeah.
I get really confused. That's why I just cut it. Like the 2 like names that come subsequently before the surname, I just cut those, or I just like leave a middle initial, because I just like I get a little like irritated trying to see that on my family tree on Ancestry.
Yeah.
I'm like such like an organizational freak with it. Like I just it kind of like gives me like a tension headache a bit.
I know what you mean. And my grandmother's mother, her name is Amelia Baldassare Melchiorre Angelina, blah, blah, blah. There's at least 10 names behind her first name. And I asked somebody, and they said that's what they did, because they not only did they want to get in, specific ancestors or relatives to keep everybody happy, maybe, or to your point, when they got married, who knows. But then they also threw in a few saints in there just for, good measure. I'll have to see if I think I have that record, one of the records floating around with all the names in it. I'll have to send it to you. And her mother was from Switzerland.
Oh, really?
From Lucerne. And that was making me batty. I can't tell you. I was like, first of all, why? They were noble. Why did he marry somebody from Lucerne, Switzerland? And he's got
the pickings of Italy. I mean,
yeah.
Why go so Sterling?
And poking around one day, I came across a book on Google that had the officers from the Neapolitan army from, I think it was like 1860 or something like that, 1859. And I find my second great grandfather, Filippo Cracciolo. He was a lieutenant in the cavalry. And just above his name, I find this Bernardo Mohr, Mohr, same spelling as my great-grandmother, my second great-grandmother. So now I'm like, okay, well, what is this? And it said he was a captain in the Swiss Guard. And I found out that Lucerne specifically would send out mercenaries to various parts of Europe.
Mm.
And I made that connection. Then I was able to find a place where they said, if you have any questions about Swiss genealogy, send us an email in Italian, German, or English. So I did that. And they said, yes, here's a link. And they sent me a link to these handwritten charts going back to the 1400s for not only the Mohr family, but to use, like you said, going down these wormholes, to all the families in Lucerne that I was related to.
Wow, that's wild. What did you get any interesting findings from these families in Lucerne?
The only thing that I could gather from it, that there were probably 10 or 12 prominent families that ran everything for centuries. And they all married into each other. So it's the Pfeiffer family, Amrine, Mohr. There were a couple others that were very German sounding. And they were all, I guess, the mayors or vice mayors. There's no nobility in Switzerland. Even back then, there wasn't.
Yeah.
But they were praetors, I think the term was. So I'm assuming that was like, head honcho, if you will.
Yeah. They were like this like loose confederate like oligarchy that just like consolidated like power amongst like families, and they weren't nobility, but they did exactly what the nobility did.
Right. Yeah. That's the way it seems. And again, all the probably 10, 12, no more than 15 names, all marrying into each other from 1300 till 1800.
Oh, wow.
And I contacted one of them, and what was really amazing was someplace in Switzerland, there's a plaque on a wall that shows like a coat of arms from her family, the Mohr family, and my second great-grandfather, Filippo Mohr, Caracciolo, next to each other on this plaque.
Oh, that's really neat.
So there was, even though they didn't have titles like counts and dukes and things like that, there was some sense of this hierarchy.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah, they still owned a crest, which symbolized high status.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been fascinating. It's great to meet a royal cousin.
Great to meet you too, Bob.
First one that I've met. So, we're going to have to go back one day and claim some of these, castles or palaces.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta just, issue the claim. And
Exactly.
just have to take it then. I mean, they're all like unoccupied too. That's the wild thing, is the government just leaves them unoccupied, and they're like going to like crap. And it's like, why? People could like own them and try to like maintain them and upkeep them.
They're my cousins that I met from over there. There are a couple of places. They're no longer in the family. And my grandmother, who was the Duchess of Capricoda, her place is now the town hall there.
Oh wow, that's nice as they at the town hall.
Yeah, so it's still it's still there, and it's still in decent shape.
I think it's my 7th or 6th great grandmother. Her father owned a palazzo in Magassano. His last name is Greco. Their palazzo is a museum for. It's dedicated to a patriot. Well, not an American patriot, but an Italian patriot who fought on the side of the Garibaldis in the unification. And Tonino Greco, he would be like my ancestor, like third cousin back in, like the 1860s. it's a museum dedicated to him and, you know, his achievements as a patriot.
Oh, that's
So
really interesting.
Yeah. So I have to go back and at least visit that. But yeah, there, you know, I noticed that like there was like, I think like a couple of like the places the De Aragona family owned in like Sicily. And there was a couple places in like Calabria as well as like Salerno, Naples that I like seen on like the internet that are on sale, like for sale. And they're like really run down though. And it's like, wow, like why did the government like confiscate them? Because I know that the government did a lot of confiscating of properties in like the 1800s and 1860s. And I guarantee you some of these properties were confiscated and they just never kept them. And it's just like these places are so like beautiful. It's just like, wow, that's a shame.
I know. It's incredible.
Places aren't made like that anymore.
No. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. And like I said, it was great to meet a royal cousin.
It's great to meet you as well, Bob. It's great to meet you as well.